Uh, oh, all right. Welcome to the ILA Leadership Perspectives webinar. This one's entitled Leadership in Ukraine Studies During Wartime. I'm Ron Riggio. I'm at the Kravitz Leadership Institute at Claremont McKenna College, and I'm a member of the Hodos Institute Advisory Board, the Research Advisory Board, and was started working with Alexander almost 2 decades ago. And we're going to be presenting on this research that covers quite a span of time. And I'm co-author of the book, but I'm going to let Alexander, who really has done the bulk of the work on this project, I'm going to have him do a rather lengthy introduction and have him tell you a little bit about himself, and then about the work that went behind the book. So, Alexander?
Yes. Hello to everyone. Good day, evening to all of you, different parts of the world. I met Ron when I was in US during my sabbatical, and was introduced to him by a professor from UK, Roger Gill, who is specializing in leadership. At that time, I was working on my doctorate at Durham University in Leadership Studies. Originally, I'm from Ukraine, from Crimea. That's where my family comes. And I immigrated with my family to US in the 90s. And then for work, I've been living and working in St. Petersburg, Russia for 19 years. So only in 2020, moved back again to US. But during this last 15 years, I was very much involved not only in theological education and faculty development, professional development of people in nonprofit, in educational sector, but I was very much interested in perceptions and practices of leadership in the countries of former Soviet Union, Russia, Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, and Central Asia. And after annexation of Crimea, our institute primarily focused on leadership phenomena in Ukraine. So Hodos Institute is the Institute of Applied Leadership Research. We study perception practices of leadership in different sectors. And then based on our research findings, we developed training materials. After the full-scale war started in Ukraine, full-scale invasion, at that time, of course, I was in US, living here with my wife, children, grandkids. I traveled to Ukraine 9 times. Upcoming, my next trip is in the end of May. And during that time and in previous trips, I was interviewing organization leaders from business, nonprofits, government, collected the data, published a couple of articles, and then the idea came up together with Ron to put together this material into the format of book. I appreciate Ron for many years of collaboration, and he advised me on different ways of research methodology and encouraged me along the way. Okay.
Yeah, Alexander's going to do a presentation here of the work in the book. And if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A, or you can put them in the chat, but ideally in the Q&A, and we'll address those after his presentation. So I guess, Alexander, if you're ready to
Yeah,
go.
in our book, we have several chapters. Some of the chapters report on the findings of, the qualitative research. Some of the chapters present the results of our analysis of questionnaires that we ask. And different chapters focus on leadership phenomena in Ukraine in the last decade. So in my presentation, I will only focus on perception of leadership from Ukrainian organizational leaders, insights from 2022 we have started interviewing people in March, April, in May of 22. So basically 1 month later, when the full-scale war started. Before I will, give you overview of that chapter and some findings, I just would like to thank everyone who stood with Ukraine through all these terrible, tragic months and years of the war. Thank you so much, and your support means so much to me, to Ron, and to all who are working and serving for the sake of peace and overcoming this huge tragedy of war. As I travel to Ukraine, I speak to people, I listen, I observe. Sometimes I pay attention to the modern art. In one of the art exhibition, I've in city Ivano-Frankivsk, I saw a couple of paintings, fresh paintings that stuck with me. One painting with a title, "We Continue to Live." There's a war, but life continues, and the theme of continuation of life is taking responsibility for yourself and for people around you. We continue to live. So Ukraine is in the war, but they continue to live. And there are lots of trauma and, of course, memories of lost homes, lost beloved ones, lost sense of peace. It's a lot. And a new generation, young generation, they have a memory of destruction. And so this young girl, she is looking at the ruins of her home, memory of my home. And there's another painting, hope. I think starting with the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, to a very simple citizens of Ukraine. All these years, the main theme was hope. Hope for a change, hope for the ceasefire, hope for a peace, for a just peace, of course, for a just peace. And that for Ukrainians means a lot, and for a sense of a strong security in Ukraine. When we started interviewing leaders from different sectors in 22, we asked 4 questions, and among the interviewees, we had different people from different sectors. We interviewed 145 people with almost even distribution of male and female. Average age was 35. And we tried to interview Ukrainian organization leaders from different regions of Ukraine. Of course, most were in center or western, because south and east was at that time occupied, and it was very dangerous to travel there for interviewing. We asked for open-ended questions. Question number 1, what does leadership mean to you in the context of the war in Ukraine? And of course, many would respond not only in the last few months of full-scale invasion, but they will reflect the years starting with 2014, annexation of Crimea and support of separatists in Donbass. Question number 2 was, as a leader, what are you doing during wartime? In what ways you are showing leadership during the wartime? The third question was, how are other Ukrainians whom you know showing their leadership? And question number 4, what kind of leadership will Ukrainians need after the war? Here are the key findings. I will read just few of them and then give for each analysis of the results for questions, couple of quotations. So we found that for Ukrainians, what leadership means during the wartime, the themes like taking initiative and responsibility, helping, protecting, supporting people, that was a very big theme. Organizing people to achieve common goals, serving, loving the country, encouraging people, stay calm, keeping others calm, A couple of quotations. Leadership in the context of war means taking responsibility for yourself, your family, and people around. And another quotation, leadership during the war is collaboration of people to overcome both military threats and humanitarian crisis caused by war. Encouraging people, staying calm, encouraging others, that was also an important theme. So one interviewee said, in the time of war, leadership is the ability to work with other people who too are going through the struggles of war, but experience them differently. Someone became a refugee, someone joined the army as a soldier, someone lost his or her friend on the battlefield or was injured. This requires empathy and active listening skills, as well as psychological strength and wisdom to tell or to do something to these people to encourage them. Question number 2 was aimed to kind of change from an abstract thinking to a more practical. So what do you do as a leader and how you show the leadership during the wartime? Very similar themes: helping, protecting, supporting people, loving, serving country, encouraging, leading, developing, supporting team and followers. That were very frequent answers. Continue to work at the workplace, paying taxes, employ people. We found that many organization leaders said, well, my responsibility is to pay people money, even if they cannot come to work, simply because it will provide them sense of stability and so on. But, ideas of taking initiative and responsibility, that was very important themes. Couple of quotations. In a time of war, which is a situation of crisis, stress, instability, and uncertainty, I take responsibility to act. I don't allow my mistakes to stop me. So, nobody is making that, we're blameless or it's easy, but I try to do my best. A second quotation is, I motivate people not to give up, to seek any meaningful opportunity to keep on living, even in the midst of war. Also, I motivate them to take care of each other. So ideas of servant leadership are there. Encouraging people, that's the code that we use for this citation. During the war, I tried to listen to people, encourage them, and give them advice if needed. I try to help people when they are making difficult decisions about evacuation, and I'm always ready to assist them to flee from a war-related dangers. I keep in touch with everyone who has evacuated from occupied cities with my assistance. And this is an interesting case, and it was quite widespread. So there were many volunteers and many people that help people to evacuate, but this idea of taking responsibility beyond, not just help person evacuate, but exchange the telephone and check in. How are you doing? Where are you now? And, this was not top-bottom initiative or top-bottom command. It was just internal kind of a culture that we observed within Ukrainian population. Question number 3, how are other Ukrainians whom you know showing their leadership? And this again was a kind of a practical question that allow people to think not only about their own behavior or their views or values, but also how other Ukrainians are acting in the times of war. Frequent responses were, helping, protecting, supporting people, loving, serving country in different ways, convincing people to evacuate. At that time, that was very important. It still are. Taking initiative and responsibility, organizing people to achieve common goals, encouraging people, very similar responses. Couple of quotations. A good example of leadership is the mayor of our city. And this is from an interview from Kharkiv, very eastern part of Ukraine. The mayor not only does solve different technical problems, but he is also good in communication with the citizens. People are waiting to watch encouraging videos, Facebook, Instagram, that's what he used from the major every morning and evening. These videos encourage, calm down, and give the feeling of stability. It's very interesting that major in Kharkiv, if the rocket bomb or Shahed will hit the city at night, they try to clean up as much as possible by the morning, so that children and women will not see any destruction in the morning. It was very fascinating. Another demonstration of bad leadership. Although there are many positive examples in the time of war, unfortunately, I also know of some bad examples. When you and other people are expecting that a leader will be in his or her place with their followers, but this leader disappears amidst the most critical situation, it disappoints. Well, we observed that many Ukrainians would tell a positive perceptions of leadership or practices, but there were some who noticed some negative, not to say toxic, but negative sides of or dark sides of leadership during wartime. The last question: what kind of leadership will Ukrainians need after the war? This question was for us important because, well, nobody, first of all, expected that the war will continue for 3 years. And so we thought, well, this is a very important time to say, well, maybe we could find something that will help us to reorient ourselves in kind of leadership development training. Well, the responses were as follows: restoring the city and country, caring for veterans and traumatized, spiritual leadership, connection to God, connection to the meaning of life, building the country with new mentality, helping, supporting people. That was very frequent responses. Demonstrating emotional skills. Well, honestly, in our studies before full scale of war, that was not as frequent as we started to notice during the war. So trauma, and people started to pay attention to emotional intelligence. Visionary leadership, importance of expert leadership in different areas. Couple of quotations. Our country requires and will increasingly need leaders who are deeply committed to their values and driven by pure motives, ready to serve our nation and their respective leaders, whether in the business or public sector. And another quotation, interviewee said, our country will need true and authentic leaders who have firsthand experience of war, who are not afraid and stayed with people, and now they can say, I was there with you during the war. We will need leaders who will have a profound understanding of the tragedy of war, who can honestly say, friends, it was hard, it was scary, some of us were depressed and confused. Leaders should listen more than speak. Post-war leadership, another quotation. Post-war leadership should begin with a reconstruction of damaged buildings. Even more crucially, attention must be given to the well-being of people, locating those who are missing, facilitating the return of refugees to their homes, arranging adoption of orphans, reuniting families, and offering psychological support to veterans and or women who have suffered sexual violence. During the last 3 years, we have done several small-scale research projects, and I would like to bring few quotations from another project, which is chapter number 6. That was interviewing the refugees or forcefully displaced people who left Ukraine, and we found them in different countries of Europe, including also US or Australia. So this was from question number 4, the same questions we asked in this research as well. Just wanted for you to hear the voices of, non-military organization leaders or citizens from Ukraine. After the war, we will need leadership in terms of soul restoration, effective soul care, work with emotional traumas, liberation, fear, and violence, PTSD, mental disorders. So caring for traumatized is a main thing, major topic. Many people will unsure of what to do after the war when they return to Ukraine. So they will need a restoration and faith in a bright future and in the potential of Ukraine. So nobody knows in what state and in what conditions the peace treaty will be or war will finish. There is so many uncertainties, and still people are longing for a kind of a visionary leadership to build a strong and innovative society within Ukraine. After the war, another quotation, we will need leadership that emphasizes service. This means everyone using their talents and skills to serve others to the fullest. It's not about controlling, limiting, or dominating, but rather genuine service. Another quotation, after the war, Ukraine needs leadership of love, leadership of acceptance, leadership of kindness. And this is my last quotation. After the war, Ukrainians will need to demonstrate personal leadership focusing on collaboration for preservation of lives, restoration of necessary resources, and for the well-being of the country. A very important motto that we've heard many times from different interviewees, that leadership in Ukraine during war or after the war, it is about partnership, it's not about competition. So a few concluding remarks. From our study, from this particular research project or other research projects, we feel that Ukrainians are demonstrating exemplary leadership during the wartime, positive behaviors aligned with transformational servant and authentic leadership, focusing on initiative, support, inspiration, and courage. And only a few observed poor leadership. Secondly, we see in Ukraine in the last decade, and especially in the last 3 years, a culture of shared leadership. Leadership during the war was increasingly seen as a personal responsibility, with a move from hierarchical to shared democratic leadership where everyone could take initiative and lead. Observation number 3 for today's webinar: while Ukrainians united to fight the war, some divisions within society remain, of course, unfortunately, but we have some difficulties there. So post-war leadership should address those divisions and focus on shared leadership values like integrity, trust, inclusivity, accountability, etc. And number 4, there seems like a longing for spiritual leadership, emotional intelligence, and cooperation in a post-war Ukraine. Many respondents emphasize the importance of healthy leadership that will take a holistic approach to rebuild Ukraine after the war, aligning the calls for maintaining kind of spiritual strength, compassion, emotional intelligence, and cooperation rather than competition. I think in our link, in our chat, we'll have a link to LinkedIn group, Leadership in Ukraine. And if you would like to follow up the research we continue to do with Ron, you could join that. But this time, Ron, I have completed overview of the slides I prepared, so I will stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. And please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. And we've already got a couple of questions here. But one of the things I thought I would do is having gone through the data as we started looking at all of these studies, and what Alexander presented was just the studies since the start of the full-scale invasion, so from 2022. But there were other studies that were done much earlier after the Crimean invasion. And I think my takeaway from a lot of this was that the Ukrainian people have experienced a number of different types of national leadership, right? So being a lot of the respondents were old enough to, have experienced the Soviet Union, and there was rejection of that model, obviously. But there were also some references to the leadership that came later in Ukraine, which was much more sort of leaders who were more self-focused and not focused on the good of the community, the welfare of the people. And there was some corruption and things like that. And so what I took away was the Ukrainian people that were interviewed and surveyed, say we've experienced lots of leadership, and what we want is democracy. We want a true democratic leadership, but leaders who are willing to serve, leaders who are willing to change the status quo, make things better, very forward thinking. One of the things I've been telling people as we were immersed in this, all of this data and going through this is and as things were going on in the United States, the political uh, perspective on Ukraine, I said, I wish we could get a copy of the book in the hands of every U.S. congressman and senator. And I think there would be no question about the U.S. continuing to fund the resistance in Ukraine. So, that was one of my takeaways. Um, so go ahead and some other questions, but there's one really interesting question that was brought up, and it's about longitudinal research. So, and I don't believe that there were any people who were interviewed in 2022 that were the same people, Alexander, that were interviewed in 2024. Were there any folks that you talked to at more than one point in time?
If there were, it's maybe one, two individuals, but there's no way we could trace, the change or dynamics of development. So there were different people.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I suspected that
Mhm.
um, can you talk a little bit about just sort of the process of some of this? Because you actually did some interviews in some pretty dangerous areas.
Well, the interviewing was done, of course, because there's several research projects, not only by me. So I had the staff and a research team. Some of the interviews were done offline in a cafeteria or in a coffee shop or in an office, hotels, or even at the at the in the office of an organization leader. But some of the questions we asked, it was done in a written form. So we just sent four questions and a person responded. And what we asked them to have respond by using several sentences, which was difficult because, when you're evacuating someone or your family is not with you and you don't know what will happen to you and to your employee tomorrow, and then responding to the questions from the strange guys who are asking a question about leadership. And yet we found so people were responded. Um, you know, there were cases where we would meet with people and we would have our own questions to ask because that's the purpose. But the interview would start with their story, a story of what happened last week, a story of that they couldn't really sleep. There were some that would start crying, and then you just listen and observe and try to say as little as possible. Um, uh, we found that Ukrainians demonstrated during the interviews the level of maturity. Uh, it's profound. People would tell the stories, but in the same time, they would never kind of panicking. Well, don't tell my story anyone. I hope you will keep confidentiality. They were sharing their stories with the idea, and we of course acknowledge that it will preserve confidentiality. But they were very sure that they need to share their ideas. They need to share their perspectives. They wanted to share what they experiencing through, because at that time, especially this project, they were all shocked, and they were already, country could be completely occupied, or they might be killed. So they wanted to have their voices and their opinions and their stories to be heard.
There's a question, Barbara Crosby. Welcome, Barbara, and thank you for this. She wanted us to comment on the emergence of what might be called informal leadership, and in particular to deal with the inadequacy of the leadership from the formal leaders. And there was one comment in there about, the sort of negative parts of leadership, leaders who absented themselves, who took off instead of continuing to lead. But I know that many of our respondents were leaders by, leaders of business or nonprofit or whatever, but they went over and above that work. So talk a little bit about the kind of informal leadership that grew out of the war itself.
Mhm. Well, we have not studied particularly in organizational leadership by focusing on few organizations, by asking a top, middle level of managers. Was not like that. We asked people who represented their organizations, but basically some of them would comment of what is going on within their organization, but mostly would comment about society at large. And there were kind of strong comments that were, in a sense, really demonstrate the type of person you are and the type of leader you are, because in a times of war, the best and worst of a person, a human being, comes out. What we found that by 2022, Ukrainian society, Ukrainian people were all shifted from top bottom perception. For example, in our research, in the previous years and now, when you ask Ukrainians what leadership means or what leadership is all about, they will rarely say leadership is the man or a woman who leads others after himself or herself. But if you take asking Russian or Belarus people from Central Asia, that's exactly. So leadership for other neighbors, Eastern neighbors from Ukraine, means a strong man and very much formal. For Ukrainians, even within the country, even within the organization, they still think it's a dynamics of interrelationships. It's an interrelationship of people might be in a different roles, leader, follower, it doesn't matter, but they're in a process of finding the common values, common strategy, common goal, and pursuing together with a kind of horizontal feedbacks.
Yeah.
So this informal leadership philosophy even happens in the formal settings within Ukrainian organizations.
Yeah, one of the takeaways that I had very early as we got into the data and the responses was how much they were typifying sort of servant leadership, and sometimes people who talked about inspiration, and so the constructs as an academic, right? The constructs of transformational leadership, being authentic, servant leadership, they really kind of bubbled to the top from these folks who are in leadership positions, but it's much more about what are they doing now during the war? How are they helping? They're doing their jobs, but they're supporting the troops, they're helping refugees, etc. One of the things, Alexander, that I think came out, if we're talking about the informal aspects, is the research done with the refugees. And so many of them were not in it, that none of them had formal leadership positions, but maybe talk about the informal roles that those folks took on in the context of being in a refugee community.
Yeah. Well, the former forcefully displaced Ukrainians, and in that case of our research, majority were women. So they would comment that basically, well, now I'm the leader of a family. I have kids. I have to take care of myself. I have to find a job. I have to find the best place for kids, a school, and if it's a Christians, find the church, find community, etc. But they would say it is so important not only to serve self, not only to take care of me and my children, but also take care of others. We're together. And some of them would say, well, I'm in Europe now, I have a job, but I'm sending money back to my relatives in Ukraine, to my husband who has no job in Ukraine. I'm supporting the military, army in Ukraine. And this networking of people, you know, while they're in Prague or while they're in Berlin, in other places, we find each other, we help one another, we assist, we share the resources, we learn from one another, we babysitting for one another. So, and it's again, if you would think how this is different from the past Soviet Union mentality where the government organizes social care. And if government doesn't provide you money, doesn't provide you with all the structure, it seems like people cannot find the way out of a situation. But this informal leadership was very evident in the way how they perceived what they need to do, their values, but also shared what they do and what other Ukrainians do as refugees.
There's a question here. So if we look at what we learned from the context of war, what are the most or some of the most important or impressive lessons that could be used in a non-war context? For example, this is Amalia asks about in the business world. So what have we learned from Ukrainian leadership that can be translated into, into everyday life, into business, into other organizations?
It's a very good question. I would say many Ukrainians comment that during the war, they have a common goal: victory, survival, common goal. And I think this, to having a common goal, common sense is a major drive. They live with a sense. There's a deep meaning why they get up in the morning or not sleep at night. There's a deep sense. And I think for business, if there is a deeper meaning beyond just making a profit, I think that is a very good lesson, because with a deep sense of why we work together. It's not only making money; it's for taking social responsibility, environmental responsibility, being responsible for each other spiritually. A deeper, it brings out of people a creativity. It brings out of people the best partnership, a freedom, and better engagement if they get this why. So to me, that is important.
That's great. Jack Berenston has a question. Does this relational view of leadership explain the success of Ukraine in resisting the Russian invasion? What are your thoughts there?
Of course, in Ukraine, we know there's an eastern part and western part. I think last 10 years, especially when Russia made the moves to annex Crimea, back up to separatists in Donbass, and with full scale, the relational idea of leadership is getting stronger. The unity of people, common language, common values, dignity of human life, and then support from one another. This many organizations would start, or many new projects would start, and in their name of the project organization, they will use a term together, razom, together, or they will use this term or idea, we're next, we're just here, мы поруч, which means relationships are very important, for people, spiritual people, transcendent ideas of relationship beyond material things, relationship with yourself, inner life, inner self, but also relationship with the community is very strong.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to Karen Perham Lippman's question about she'd love to hear more about the theme of spiritual leadership, which you just mentioned. Um, and she talks about workplace spirituality with integrated humanistic approaches, Guillory's work. Um, or how did leaders embody the spiritual leadership behaviors? So, could you comment on that?
Well, with workplace spirituality, it's a quite a huge range of definitions, from almost copying religious ideas and practices at the workplace to a more kind of individual, not community focused spirituality. We've heard from different interviewees because they represented different organizations, and there are different people, of course, different ideas. But what was common is that you cannot survive, you cannot win, you cannot live during the wartime if you do not nurture your inner soul, if you do not pay attention to who you are, if you do not ask the questions, what is my role in life, why I'm here, what's wrong, those kind of a deep philosophical, spiritual questions. And then you also have kind of spiritual practices. Sometimes the interviewers would say, well, the war is such a time and place where you can serve nonstop, but you could burn out completely. So you have to take care of yourself. Take time for silence, solitude, sit down, just rest, because if you do not recharge your emotional, spiritual batteries, you cannot really help others.
Good point. Yeah. So Deborah Finlayson has a question here. She says, Alexander, this research is so important in representation of standing strong in difficult times, and that's clear. And she's interested in how Ukrainian followership, so part of the followership community, and how that impacted their strong response.
Well, I would say because of democratic process in Ukraine, starting with 1991, when Ukraine became independent from Soviet Union, Незалежна Україна, citizens in Ukraine understood their important role, not from a point of view of positional leadership, but from a point of view of participants in the history, in the future of Ukraine. And I would say, if before people with some formal power, police force, army, or others, were viewed as kind of a strong people that are above law, I think during this time, for example, our interviewers would say, well, we are not glorifying Zelensky. We're not considering him as a messiah at all. But at these difficult times, we will be patient enough to respect him for his symbolic role, but we know the faults. And so there is enough freedom within Ukraine that people can have their voice to disagree. And I would say the followership, in a sense of knowing when to follow and when to resist, is very strong in Ukraine.
That's good. Yeah, yeah, that's a great answer. Jonathan Gosling has a question. Actually, this might might be uh, the good sort of closing question, but let's address it now. We're not ready to uh, close yet. So about envisioning the future, there are quite different possible futures. How are people thinking about leadership in relation to these? For example, if a state of almost war continues, or a settled peace, or what happens if NATO collapses. So I know there's a lot there, but what are some of the things that that you recall in I guess the more recent conversations um, that that talk about how people are envisioning the future? I mean, my sense from going through the data is that, and remember too, that we collected this over time, so people didn't know in 2022 that this was going to last for years and years, and so the responses then would be different than the responses in 2024 after a couple of years of war. But maybe just some thoughts on people's Ukrainian perceptions of the future.
Well, it's very atypical responses, maybe from us who live in a more or less in a different environment. We still have our difficulties around us, political, economical, but it's not the war. But for people that live in Ukraine through the war time, last decade, especially last 3 years, when they talk about future, there's a deep, wise notion of unknown. They do not afraid to admit that they're scared of unknown, because they said we never lived in the time after war. We used to live in the war. Now it's a long time, but we never lived and cooperated with each other after war. I do not know myself after war. So there's a little bit of anxiety, uncertainty, what will happen. And it so much depends from the scenario, because everyone is scared a solution when the cultural trauma, collective trauma will be, we failed, we lost, because you don't really know what will happen then. So in a sense, it's a mode of survival, resistance, and hope for the better, but it's also admission of we don't really know what will happen with us.
Yeah, yeah, that's got to be a terrible situation to be in. Um, Karen had a follow-up question on the issue of the followers resisting, and she asked what empowered the followers to resist or counter the instances of bad leadership. What do you think was going on there?
Oh, I would say we have to admit that uh, Ukrainian people and Ukrainian culture has ingrained this notion of being in disagreement with others, not easy to obey any commands. So that ingrained, it has some difficulty, because in democracy is difficult. Like Ira Shalev in his recent book mentions, so democracy is very difficult, and dictatorial approach is very easy. So the processes from Ukraine is difficult. And followership, that's part of their mentality. Not easy to agree, be involved, engaged in determination. So there's a discernment, decision-making processes. That's very more cultural, rather than longing for a strong man who will figure out our future will just follow it,
Yeah.
follow him or her. So Ukrainians are different. And in that way, I feel the Western countries, if they continue support, will find a very strong partner for decades. Ukrainian people are very much rooted in these democratic processes where followers are important as good leaders as well.
Yeah, that came through very clearly in their comments. The love of democracy, the yearning for democracy, and as I said earlier, they have experienced so much of the sort of bad leadership
Mhm.
coming out of the Soviet system, and you know, and the war just sort of shines a light on that. So, um, are there any additional questions? Go ahead and just throw them in the chat. And if not, then I'm just gonna. Oh, yes. So I will make a plug. Deborah, thank you. We're going to be talking about this research at the ILA's Global Conference in Prague in October. So hope to see all of you there. And we'll have a session where we'll have plenty of time to discuss. And Alexander has, I think you have another trip coming up, so you may have some
Yes, yeah,
new insights, and we may
yeah,
continue the research as we go forward. Um, so, yeah, as you
yeah.
can see in the chat, Deborah's saying if you are interested, the book is out. It's as Edward Elgar does. They publish for a year in hardcover, so it's very very expensive. I think the ebook is less expensive, but there should be a soft cover, a paperback version coming out in about 9 or 10 months. So. But if you're really interested, it really is encouraging, heartwarming to read the words of these people who are living under wartime. Any closing comments, Alexander?
Well, I just would like to say thank you to the participants, to those that joined the webinar. Some colleagues that we met at LA meetings, some colleagues we met in a different, some new colleagues. So thank you so much. We just wanted to join the efforts together and pay attention. I think it makes sense to continue join the efforts with research further.
Yeah,
And if there are some openness and maybe ideas how to partner with us, let us know.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you
Yeah,
all for your attention. And ILA will be sending out a link to the recording in the next few days. So if you're interested in that, and please share. I think we went into this with the idea that, this is important information for the world to understand what it's like to go through a situation like what Ukraine is going through right now, a potential threat in this very, very difficult world that we live in. So thank you again, and we'll see you at ILA Prague. Thank you,
yeah.
Alexander.
Thank you.